Everyone knew that. History had proven it repeatedly. The Teutonic Knights began their advance. Imagine the sound. Hundreds of horses' hooves on ice, the creaking of leather, the rattle of armor and weapons. The wedge formation moved forward like an armored fist. Unstoppable, inexorable, terrifying. The ground troops watching from both sides knew what was about to happen. They'd all heard the stories. The wedge would hit the Novgorod lines like a battering ram, shatter their formation, and turn the battle into a slaughter. Except that's not what happened. As the Teutonic wedge charged forward, Nevsky's front lines did something unexpected. They retreated. Not in panic, in coordination. The Novgorod center gave ground steadily, deliberately, drawing the Teutonic Knights forward, away from the solid ground of the shoreline and deeper onto the ice. The Teutonic commanders, seeing the Novgorod forces breaking, pressed their advantage. They spurred their horses faster, tightening the wedge, preparing for the kill. They were so focused on the retreating enemy in front of them that they didn't notice they were being led. The Novgorod forces weren't panicking. They were performing a tactical withdrawal that had been planned and rehearsed. They were leading the Teutonic Knights exactly where Nevsky wanted them, onto the weakest sections of the ice, the areas he'd identified where the surface would hold initially but would crack under sustained pressure and weight. And then, at the exact moment the Teutonic wedge was fully committed, spread across a half-mile section of ice with nowhere to maneuver quickly, Nevsky sprung his trap. Archers who'd been hidden behind ice ridges and snow banks on the flanks suddenly emerged, hundreds of them. They didn't aim for the knights themselves. The armor made that pointless. They aimed for the horses. Arrows struck the unarmored or lightly armored horses, causing them to rear, to scream, to crash into each other. The perfect formation of the wedge began to break apart. Knights who'd been riding in tight coordination were suddenly scattered across the ice, their formation destroyed, their momentum broken. And that's when the Novgorod infantry and light cavalry attacked from both flanks. The heavily armored Teutonic Knights found themselves in the worst possible situation, fighting on unstable footing, unable to maneuver properly, surrounded by faster, lighter enemy forces who could strike and retreat before the Knights could respond effectively. But the real killer wasn't the Novgorod forces. It was the ice itself. As hundreds of heavily armored knights and their war horses thrashed around as combat intensified, as the weight concentrated in specific areas, the ice began to crack. First, small fractures, barely noticeable amid the chaos of battle. Then larger breaks, then entire sections giving way. The first knights to go through the ice were the ones whose horses stumbled into weak spots. One moment they were fighting, the next they were in water so cold it felt like being stabbed with 1,000 knives simultaneously. Here's what happens when you fall through ice in full armor. You have about 60 seconds before hypothermia-induced unconsciousness. The armor that protected you from arrows and swords is now a death sentence. 60 pounds of steel and chainmail pulls you down. You try to swim. Impossible. You try to grab the edge of the ice. Your gauntleted hands can't grip properly. You try to call for help. Water floods your mouth. Your fellow knights above you can't help because pulling you out would require them to dismount and approach the break, and the ice is already cracking further. So they watch you sink. Some knights tried to remove their armor underwater, with numb fingers and pitch-black water while drowning. None succeeded. Some managed to get their helmets off before going under, gasping for air, trying to keep their heads above water. The lake was 40 feet deep in places. There was no standing, no shallow water. Just cold and darkness and the weight of armor dragging you down. Witnesses from both sides later described the sound. Hundreds of armored men hitting the water, the cracking of ice, the screams that were cut short as they went under. One Novgorod chronicler wrote, "And there was such a slaughter of Germans and Estonians that they could be heard 3 versts away, and there was nowhere to run, for the lake swallowed them." 3 versts is about 2 miles. The sound of the ice cracking and men dying could be heard 2 miles away. The Teutonic Knights, who hadn't broken through the ice yet, faced an impossible choice. Continue fighting on the treacherous surface, or retreat. Many chose retreat, but retreating in heavy armor across cracking ice while being pursued by enemy forces proved just as fatal as staying. More knights broke through. more drowned. The wedge formation, the tactic that had conquered half of northern Europe, had become a death trap. Grandmaster Hermann von Balk, the commander of the Teutonic forces, was either killed in the battle or captured. Historical sources disagree. What's certain is that the Teutonic Order suffered catastrophic losses. Conservative estimates suggest 400 knights killed, with perhaps another 50 captured. For context, the entire Teutonic Order probably had fewer than 2,000 knights total across all their territories. Losing 400 in a single afternoon was a devastating blow, but the true casualties were higher because each knight was supported by squires, infantry, and support troops. Total Teutonic casualties, including foot soldiers and support personnel, probably exceeded 1,000 dead. The Novgorod forces suffered casualties too, but significantly fewer. Most estimates suggest a few hundred killed, brutal but sustainable. More importantly, they'd achieved what seemed impossible. They'd defeated the most feared military force in medieval Europe using terrain, deception, and intimate knowledge of local conditions. When the battle ended, the ice was littered with bodies, some on the surface, some visible beneath the ice, some already sunk too deep to see. As spring progressed and the ice fully melted, bodies would wash up on the shores of Lake Peipus for weeks. Local villagers found armor and weapons for months afterward. Some bodies remained trapped in the lake's mud and weren't discovered until centuries later. The Battle of Lake Peipus accomplished everything Alexander Nevsky had hoped. The Teutonic Knights' eastward expansion was permanently halted. They never again threatened Novgorod. The battle secured the independence of the Novgorod Republic and protected Orthodox Christianity from forced conversion. It established Russia as a regional power that could defend itself against Western European military orders. And it made Alexander Nevsky a legendary figure. He'd be canonized as a saint by the Russian Orthodox Church in 1547, and his image would be invoked throughout Russian history whenever the nation faced invasion from the West. But beyond the geopolitical implications, the Battle of Lake Peipus taught military strategists something crucial. Terrain matters more than equipment. Environmental conditions can neutralize technological advantages. Local knowledge can defeat superior armor and training, and nature itself can be the deadliest weapon on any battlefield. The Teutonic Knights never forgot this lesson. In their later campaigns, they became much more cautious about where and when they fought, much more attentive to local conditions and seasonal changes. Other medieval commanders studied the battle and learned that heavy cavalry, despite its dominance in most situations, had crucial vulnerabilities that could be exploited by a clever defender. Nevsky's victory became a template for asymmetric warfare, how a weaker force could defeat a stronger one by changing the terms of engagement, by using deception and terrain, by turning the enemy's strengths into liabilities. These lessons remain relevant today. Modern military doctrine still emphasizes the importance of terrain analysis, weather conditions, and local intelligence. The principle Nevsky demonstrated, that you don't have to fight the enemy on their terms, that you can choose your battlefield and make the environment work for you, is as valid now as it was in 1242. Today, if you visit Lake Peipus, there's a monument near the spot where the battle took place. On clear days, you can look across the ice in winter and imagine what happened there almost 800 years ago. The lake looks peaceful now, frozen and still. Beautiful. But underneath that ice lies one of history's most brilliant tactical victories and one of its most horrifying mass graves. The Battle of Lake Peipus reminds us that the greatest victories often come not from superior force, but from superior thinking. That impossible situations can be overcome with creativity and courage. That knowledge of your homeland, its terrain, its seasons, its conditions, can be more valuable than any armor or weapon. Alexander Nevsky proved that a 21-year-old prince facing the most feared military order in Christendom could turn a frozen lake into the deadliest trap in medieval warfare. He showed that nature, when properly understood and deployed, could accomplish what no army could achieve through force alone. And he taught us that sometimes the best way to win is not to fight your enemy's battle, but to make them fight yours. On your terms, on your ground, where every advantage belongs to you and every step they take leads them closer to disaster. That's the real legacy of the battle on the ice. Not just a Russian victory over German invaders, but a masterclass in strategic thinking that's still studied in military academies worldwide. Want to explore more legendary battles where tactical genius triumphed over superior force? Subscribe to Flow of History, because the greatest victories in history weren't won by the strongest armies, but by the smartest commanders.